What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Julian Farrow here from the Photosphera YouTube channel. I'm back with another lens review. I know it's been a little while, I think over 2 years since I last reviewed the Canon EFM 1122, which got glowing rate. People loved it. They thought it was very helpful. So that's great. So we're back here today with another lens review. We're going to be talking about the Canon RF 14-35 f4L IS USM. Let's get right into it. So guys, we're going to be doing a little bit of an unboxing. I'm going to be taking the approach of a full-time real estate photographer when I'm reviewing this lens because this is what I've been using the lens for. I've been using it for a little over a year and a half. There will be many images from houses, architectural things, but I'm going to go over image quality, chromatic aberration, flare, the optical image stabilization, anything that I feel is pertinent to a buyer that wants to buy this lens, so don't worry. But I am coming to this approach from a full-time real estate photographer. So I've been using it for a year and a half, and we're gonna do a little unboxing for you. I know I've already opened the box, but I'm gonna show you anyway what is inside this box. So we'll get right to it. So we have our usual Canon little transport bag, little storage bag that comes with these lenses, with the L lenses. Canon gracefully provided us with a lens hood as well. Got some styrofoam here. We got our usual manuals, warranty cards as usual. We'll put the lens pouch back in the box because I'm not going to be using it. And we'll take out the lovely RF 14-35, guys. Now just a brief overview about this lens. It does come with a 1-year warranty. It retails for around $1,600, $1,699 US, and around $2,300 Canadian. I purchased mine last year at Excellent Photo here in Montreal. A big shout out to my buddy Eli for the excellent service. Excellent Photo, excellent service. And it was released at the end of June 2021, a little bit after its bigger brother, the RF 15-35 2.8. Speaking about build quality and handling, let's talk a bit about the lens. Well, it is certified. Obviously, it's a Canon L lens, so there's a lot of, obviously that means high quality. Weather sealing as designated by the red ring. It is made in Japan. It has a metal lens mount in the back, mostly made of polycarbonate plastic, but these lenses definitely could take a beating. I use this day in and day out for real estate, banging into it. Sometimes I dropped it and it's still going strong. So these lenses are built to last. You have your usual Canon control ring over here. It could be used to change aperture, ISO, white balance, autofocus setting. I don't use the control rings, but they're fantastic. You have your autofocus ring over here, your focusing ring, and then you have your zoom ring over here. The lens does zoom in and out, but the barrel does pop out just a bit. It has a focal range effective of 14 millimeters all the way to 35 millimeters and an aperture range of f4 all the way to f22. On the side, we have our manual and autofocus override if we need, and we have our stabilization button for on or off. Now the lens is rated for 5.5 stops of stabilization for cameras that don't have in-body stabilization and 7 stops of stabilization for camera bodies that do have stabilization, such as the Canon R6 that I'm filming on, Canon R3, Canon R5, and you're gonna see later on I've actually got images. I photographed images with this lens up to 2 seconds handheld. It's really, really astronomically good, the stabilization. It's really something special. So Canon did a great job. It has a 77 millimeter filter. Okay, and it weighs about 540 grams. So the 77 millimeter filters are readily accessible, which is great. They're not overly expensive. Its bigger brother, I think, has an 82 millimeter filter, which is also a little bit more expensive. But the 77 millimeter filters are great. It does have the fluorine coatings to help with glare, help with fingerprints, and it has a nano USM, nano ultrasonic motor, which you're gonna see later in the autofocusing test, and sound test is so quiet, I wasn't even able to hear this lens focus from in camera, which is really astounding. So the nano USM focusing motor is a wonderful, wonderful focusing motor, and they're becoming more and more common in this day and age. A little bit about the lens. We have a minimum focusing distance of about 7.9 inches. So I think it gives us a magnification of about 0.38.4, which is crazy because it's almost half lifelike. So you can get some pretty close shots. You can see some on the screen here. They're pretty damn close. I mean, you got Yeah, it's pretty good. It focuses pretty close. Like I said, it does extend slightly throughout the range when you're focusing from 14 to 35. I haven't had any issues with dust coming into this lens just yet, so that's good. But I much prefer barrels that don't pop out, that are sort of internal, than ones that are outside. So that's a bit of a bummer, but it's okay. Compared to its bigger brother, the RF 15 to 35, this lens is a bit different. Obviously, it loses one stop of light. It's an f4 lens versus an f2.8 lens. But in my opinion, it's much lighter. I just find, 540 grams versus like almost 900 grams. You're talking almost half the weight. It's a lot smaller. It's a lot less beefy in your hand. And honestly, for what I use it for, real estate, we're mostly on a tripod. For landscape photographers, we're mostly on a tripod. I think that the 1435 is fantastic. And you even gain that 1 millimeter of focal length. So for that, I applaud Canon, obviously. So guys, let's talk about the autofocus and a bit of the image stabilization qualities of this lens. As you're gonna see on the screen, the autofocus, even in lower light, is really, really quick. It's very fast. Look, you can see it on the screen. It's, from item to item, object to object, it goes really, really quick. There's almost no delay. And you can barely even hear the focusing motor. It has no issue focusing on any subject, even in lower light. I have a couple videos demonstrating this. This was in really, really low light, actually. We're talking on, I think this was like -5 EV, -4 EV, and it has no problems focusing on these, on these subjects. And you barely hear the autofocusing motor. Look at it, it's fantastic. It's so quiet. I was almost amazed. I thought I had my sound off at one point, but I didn't. It just focuses really, really quickly, as you can tell. The only sounds you're really hearing are me clicking the buttons and stopping the recording. Other than that, it just focuses wonderfully. It's really, really great. Speaking about the image stabilization, as I told you before, it's rated for around 5.5 stops. So I tested this walking handheld with an EOS R, Canon EOS R, because at that time my Canon R6 was actually in for repair. So once again, if you look on the screen, you're going to be able to see some of the testing that I did to show the quality of the image stabilization when walking or when running. And once again, it was really, really good. It was really impressive. So as you can see here on the screen, we're walking without the image stabilization turned on. We'll just turn off the sound there. So this has no image stabilization. We're walking, walking, walking. And then as I turn the IS on, it does create a nice difference. I wouldn't recommend walking handheld with a lens. I mean, a gimbal is much better, anything stabilization. So obviously, it isn't usable 100%. I wouldn't suggest you run and rely on your optical image stabilization to keep things stable, but it was more of just to show what the possibilities are with the optical image stabilization in the lens. As for subjects, still subjects, if you see here, this is at 1.6 seconds. So if I zoom in, of course, it's not perfect. I have very shaky hands, but this was at 1.6 seconds. So, obviously someone with much more stable hands, maybe leaning on the wall, you could probably even get by with the OIS on. This shot, I believe, was at 0.5 seconds. And at 0.5 seconds, even for somebody like me with shaky hands, the images are almost perfectly usable. So the optical image stabilization in this lens is really, really, really special. And I think that Canon did a wonderful job. And as you can see on the lens, you have the override on, off, over here. And as you turn the image stabilization on, when you have a camera activated that has OIS, you'll automatically see a little symbol in the screen showing a hand with some brackets around it, signaling that you have effectively turned on the optical image stabilization. Let's talk about vignetting, distortion, chromatic aberration, and Sunstars. That was a mouthful, but we're gonna go quickly. I promise, guys, I'm not gonna bore you with a lot of this stuff. The elephant in the room on this lens, unfortunately, is the amount of vignetting and distortion. There had to have been some sacrifices Canon made when they developed a lens that's this small, that goes all the way down to 14 millimeters of length. Unfortunately, I find that it suffers heavily from that even when corrected. And when you bring it into Lightroom or Capture One or any of these programs, the profile corrections do a wonderful job of correcting the vignetting and correcting the barrel distortion. However, as a real estate photographer, I still see this shooting, especially close to straight lines on a wall. There's still curvature that needs to be adjusted. All wide angle lenses do have barrel distortion, but I find this one is significant. And to me, that was a big, big downfall of this lens. My EF 1635, which I owned before this lens, had significantly less barrel distortion. Granted, it did not go as wide as 14. This lens actually, I believe, without any distortion, is more along the lines of 11 or 12 millimeters. But when you bring in the profile corrections, it actually takes off 2 millimeters to straighten out that barrel distortion. So it's actually wider than 14. They had to go wider to then narrow the focal length to correct that distortion. So it distorts heavily when it's not corrected, and there's a heavy vignette, as you're gonna see on the screen. Its bigger brother, the RF 1535, doesn't have any of these issues. I've used it. For me, I still opted for this one because it was cheaper and I preferred the size. I just found the 1535 too unwieldy, too large. But to me, when I'm using a lens like the Laowa 20mm shift 0D, Laowa means that when they say zero distortion, these lenses have almost no distortion. So coming from a Laowa lens that has zero distortion to my 1435 was a very, very big shock. The distortion was real and it's heavy. So if we look on the screen here, this is a shot of a brick wall taken at 14 millimeters, as you can see over here on the screen. If you look at the barrel distortion, it's actually significant. Look at the vignetting, look at those lines. They're completely skewed. It's awful. You know, then you go down to 35 and it's mostly corrected. Here's 35 millimeters and here's 14. So, the barrel distortion is real. You can see how wide the shot is, but it's real. Now, if I correct it, if I go to enable profile corrections, obviously, it cleans up nicely, you can see. But we've lost a significant amount of that frame on the left and a significant amount of that frame on the right. So yes, it does clean up well using profile corrections. I don't want someone to think that it's not correctable. It really is, and for the average person, nobody would probably even be complaining about this. But as a real estate and architectural photographer, I find this to be a real pain. It's something that I still deal with. I have another shot here actually to show, it's the same wall, but here, uncorrected again, to show you. The vignetting over here. There's vignetting, serious vignetting here, serious barrel distortion here, and at 35, it's completely gone, it's clear. So obviously it's real. It's an unfortunate aspect of this lens that someone needs to deal with. Moving on to chromatic aberrations, both the cervical longitudinal chromatic aberrations and lateral chromatic aberrations. I'm not big on these types of aberrations because it's so rare that I'm shooting directly with a backlit subject, but I do have some images to show you on screen what this looks like. If we look here, this was a backlit image with the sun coming in around the left side. We're at 35 millimeters, wide open at f4. If we zoom in, we can see a bit of discoloration, a bit of blue from the chromatic aberration, I believe longitudinal and lateral chromatic aberration, okay? It's not severe, but it is present. We could see it. We move on to the next image at 14 millimeters, f4 wide open. It still exists. There's a bit of blue here, but not as bad as it is at 35. I find this lens suffers greatly at 35 millimeters. Moving on, 14 millimeters f4, moving on to 35 at 5.6. We move in and it's been greatly reduced. There's still a bit of blue, purple, but really reduced by 80–90% as we can see here on the screen. Same thing goes at 14 millimeters. Almost gone. We go to f8, 35. Let me just bring up the exposure. Oh yeah, and by the way, guys, these are CR3 raw files, almost basically untouched with no sharpening applied. We zoom in and at f8, there's almost nothing. Chromatic aberration, both longitudinal and lateral, has been completely vanished. So it does suffer from a bit of longitudinal chromatic aberrations, lateral chromatic aberrations, but it's not over the top. And I believe anybody can deal with this with a little bit of cleanup in Lightroom or Capture One. Purple fringing and aberrations can be cleaned up significantly with this lens, but it's not a big proponent of that. So let's talk about the lens flare and what kind of Sunstars you can expect with this lens. So looking back here, I took a little test shot for you guys to show you the Sunstars capable with this lens. Here we go. Let's go full screen. This is at f4. You're getting a bit of a Sunstar. I wasn't using a lens hood on any of these shots. This is at f5.6. Nice, Sunstars here. This is at f8. Sorry, f11. And here at f22, beautiful Sunstars. I believe they're 12, 13 points, something like that. I didn't count the exact amount of points, and I don't even know how many diaphragm blades this lens has. I didn't even research it. To me, it wasn't pertinent about someone who wants to buy the lens. All I want to tell my viewers is that you're capable of creating really nice Sunstars with this lens. Speaking about lens flare, I took a video for you once again without the lens hood to show exactly what you can expect. And if you look on the screen without a lens hood, the lens does flare. But you know, think about it. We're literally shooting directly into the sun here. All these little lens flares that you're seeing, a lot of which may have been able to be avoided had I put on the lens hood. I specifically did it without the lens hood as a torture test to show what kind of, you know, flare you can expect. And it does flare a little bit. I actually even took another one in my studio to show. Let's see if I can find it as a torture test because the sun wasn't out. It was this one right here, directly into my light. And you're gonna see a bit of flare, but honestly, all in all, it's not a bad lens. It doesn't flare too heavily, you know, especially for video, because I also use this lens for real estate video as well. So that's it speaking about lens flare. Moving on. You guys are probably all wondering about image quality. Let's move on to still image quality. And you know what, guys? It's a showstopper. This lens has extraordinary image quality for the price that you're paying. In fact, this lens is sharp from 14 millimeters all the way to about 28. 35 is a bit of a weak spot. I don't think anybody would really notice, but it's extraordinary. It's got wonderful image quality. It represents great value for what you're paying. I did my usual wall test to show you guys image quality, which we're gonna start with that. And as you can see on the screen at the same time, I'm gonna show a bunch of images showing the image quality of this lens. A lot of these are JPEGs straight out of camera. Some are real estate images that have been retouched, delivered to clients, and some are unedited, untouched, and unsharpened RAWs. All the way from f4 right down to about f11, the lens corner to corner from 14 millimeters right down to 28 to 30 is sharp. Sharp, sharp, sharp. But let's take a quick look, guys, together. Let's go into Lightroom once again and take a look, okay? So here's image quality. We're starting at 14 millimeters f4, okay? Guys, these are uncorrected. So you're gonna see a bit of vignetting. Image quality in the center, very, very sharp. We head down to the corner. Obviously, we have a bit of vignetting. Okay, but still, you know, adequately sharp. Moving on, let's go to 23 millimeters. Once again, f4. In the center, we're at 100% zoom, very, very sharp. Sharp across the board. In the corners, f4, 23 millimeters, still relatively sharp. Very good, especially for an ultra wide lens going to 14 millimeters, guys. Don't forget that, we're not at 35 here, we're at 14 millimeters. That is ultra, ultra wide. Moving on, 24 millimeters, f5.6. Center, extremely sharp. Moving down to the corners at 5.6, 24 millimeters. Really, really sharp, usable. Whether it's wide open or one stop down, very, very sharp. Moving on, 35 millimeters, f5.6. This is more of a weak point for this lens in my opinion. At 35, it isn't as sharp, but I don't think anybody would be able to see the difference. Moving into the corner here, as you can see a bit of softness over here at 35 millimeters in the corner. I think the lens is sharper at 14 in the corners than it is actually at 35, which is pretty crazy. Going down to 14 millimeters again, f8, 24 millimeters, f8, here we go, okay. What do we got here? Let's go to 35 millimeters, f11, okay. We're not approaching diffraction yet, but f11, 35 millimeters. 1 second, okay, not too bad. If we go over here to 24 millimeters at f11. In the corner, not too bad. In the center, still very sharp. Okay, great. We're looking great. So far, guys, the image quality has been fantastic. Now let's move into f22 at 24 millimeters. Now, obviously at f22, diffraction has starts to kick in and things are not as sharp. So 22 millimeters, here's at 14 millimeters, f22. Bad vignetting, and obviously the image quality really starts to suffer in the center and in the corners. Things start to get very soft and muddy. Let's head back to f22, 24 millimeters. Same thing, not as sharp, things start to soften up. Diffraction really starts to kick in at f22. I wouldn't recommend using this lens at f22. And heading down to 35 millimeters, f22 in the center, very, very soft. This is not sharp at all. We're getting mushy here. As you can see, muddy textures are almost glued together. Not the greatest. But once again, that's diffraction kicking in. There's not much that we can do about that. It is what it is. So yeah, that's pretty much what it is when it comes down to image quality for this lens. All in all, I would say it's a stellar performer. I have nothing to say. I've been using it a year and a half. I never had one client come back to me say that it was bad. It had bad image quality. For me, it's just fantastic. Alternatives to this lens. What are the alternatives to this lens? Let's talk about other choices because not everyone's going to want to spend this kind of money. Most of the lenses out there, other than Canon's own 14mm prime or maybe Laowa 15, are mostly not as wide as this lens. There are a few options. You have Canon's older brother, the Canon 1635 f4 L IS USM. It is larger because you have to put an adapter on, and it's also bigger as a lens. So for me, the 1435 wins. We have the Canon RF 16 2.8. It's a lens in a completely different realm. It's a $300 STM lens. In fact, if I take my nifty 50 out, it's somewhere here. It's a cheap little plastic lens. If you want to get into the realm of wide angle photography, this might be a good option, but you have to understand the image quality will suffer. It isn't the same type of lens. It's a $300 plastic, cheaply built lens. But you know what? I've seen some images from it stop down to 5.6, and it still does a pretty good job. Canon's bigger brother, the RF 1535 2.8. Well, the 1535 does not suffer from the same barrel distortion or vignetting that this bad boy does. Not even close. I would say the image quality is comparable. Some say the image quality is better. I haven't seen that. Unfortunately, I don't have these lenses to show you because I don't own 15 wide angle lenses. I need only one or two. The 1535 is also heavier, but it does have a stop of light faster. So it's a 2.8 lens versus an f4 lens. However, it does take 82mm filters, which are big, bulky, and very expensive. 77mm filters, such as this bad boy, are much more readily available and for a much more reduced cost. Probably the best quality lens out of all the lenses I'm going to mention, the Sigma 14 to 24 2.8. This is the best ultra wide angle lens that I've ever used, apart from maybe the Zeiss Loxia 21, but we're at 21mm. It's not really the same. The Sigma 2.8, gargantuan. Sigma makes ridiculously good lenses. It's bar none image quality. They don't care about the size. In fact, I'm filming with my Sigma 40 Art right now. Their art lenses are to die for. If there was one lens that I didn't have to buy, if I didn't have my 14 to 35, I would have a Sigma 14 to 24. Even with the adapter, the lens is probably 1.5 pounds. It's massive, and it only goes to 24mm. I would still use it because it's that good. The image quality is sublime, nothing to say about that. And it's significantly less expensive. I think I wrote it down. I think it actually comes down to being about around $1,500, give or take, Canadian. So much less than the $2,300 plus tax you're gonna pay for this, and it's readily available on the used market. So the Sigma is definitely what I would recommend if you're not gonna buy this. If you don't mind larger lenses. Next up in line, the Tokina Opera 16 to 35 2.8. Also a wonderful lens. I won't get into the specifics of that because I've never tried it. And the Tamron 15 to 30 2.8. Also a wonderful lens. So these are only a couple of the other options that, for me, are available outside of buying the RF 1435. The reason I bought the 14 to 35 was simply because I didn't want to use an adapter. I didn't need 2.8, so I didn't buy the bigger brother, and I wanted a lens that had very good optical image stabilization, and I just wanted a lens having a Canon backed up warranty. Canon has very good customer service, and I know that if ever there was a problem with my lens, I send it out to Canon, and it would get taken care of without problem. I've had, unfortunately, worse off experiences with Sigma in the past. I hate to say it, but that was my experience. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this review. I hope you found this useful. I hope it wasn't too long. I know sometimes lens reviews tend to get overboard. I didn't want to get into the crazy semantics of everything. I wanted to talk about things I thought were pertinent from a day-to-day real estate photography standpoint, and for prospective buyers that were interested in buying the lens. All in all, the 1435 represents solid value for what it is. The image quality is stellar across the board, minus maybe perhaps the 35mm range. Let's be honest, 14 to 35 is a massive range. It has great optical image stabilization, an extremely quiet nano USM motor, good Canon backed up support. I mean, what can I say? 7 stops of image stabilization. The only real thing that I don't like is the barrel distortion. Like I said, it's the elephant in the room. I know that it's corrected, and the vignetting and the barrel distortion are both corrected. The problem I have is how much image quality degradation is happening behind the scenes that you're not seeing. I can't say I've had any customer ever tell me they were unhappy with the images that came out of this lens. I've personally always been happy. So there's that. There's the fact that there are other lenses out there that are a little bit cheaper, that provide similar image quality, in fact, at times better. Looking at you, Sigma 14 to 24. And $2,300 or $1,700 US is not pocket change. It's still a lot of money for this lens. Some people can't justify spending that kind of money on a lens that don't do this for a living. I understand that. So other than that, I love this lens. If this breaks, I would happily buy another one, and I'm gonna keep using it for day to day in all my real estate photography and architectural gigs. So I wanna thank you once again for tuning in. I hope it wasn't too long. If you like the channel, please feel free to subscribe, give a thumbs up, leave a comment if you have any questions, any suggestions. I try to answer all my comments. And with that being said, I want to wish you guys a wonderful day, and don't forget to stay visual, people, and I will see you in the next video. Take care now. Have a great day.